Of the many long-form strategy games I've missed since becoming a busy adult who can't sit down and complete a game for the life of me, XCOM's near the top of the list. Its grand wars against alien invasions are some of my favorite strategy games in recent memory, but also kind of long, especially when you inevitably screw it up and have to restart a few times. When you don't have the time to finish a full campaign in the first place, the idea of starting a run over 10 hours in isn't the most palatable. But enter Chimera Squad, a somewhat shorter, lighter spin-off for the franchise that seeks to expand the lore and play around with a few novel gameplay concepts. And as is the theme with this channel, taking a well-known but traditionally long title and making it a little shorter and more accessible is one of the quickest ways to get my attention. So here we go. As always, I'm Alex, and this is First 5, where I ask if games are worth your time, not your money. I played a game for 5 hours, and I'm gonna tell you if those were 5 hours well spent. And today we're cleaning up the streets in XCOM Chimera Squad. Despite being a spin-off, Chimera Squad doesn't fall quite as far from the tree as one might expect. There's a city anarchy mechanic which works the same as it did back in XCOM Enemy Unknown, tech trees, an overworld map you can build up field squads on to maintain order and get some regular income, and oh boy, there it is, Iron Man mode. Thankfully, I haven't had to restart Chimera Squad, as the metagame side has been heavily simplified and is admittedly kinda hard to screw up. It mostly revolves around those field squads I just mentioned. Invest in them heavily and early, and you'll pretty much have the map in lockdown by the end of the 4th or 5th hour, and won't have to worry very much about a critical campaign failure. And from there, it's just a slow process of increasing your income and going down the tech tree to keep up with the game's escalating roster of enemies. The narrative similarly falls in line with the rest of XCOM. It has a few big bullet point ideas on how the world has developed since XCOM 2, but outside of that, most of the narrative is whatever emergent storytelling happens to your little police squad in individual firefights. The game picks up with a big terrorist attack you have to foil, then sets you on the trail of 3 different criminal organizations to figure out who perpetrated it, occasionally giving you a mission where you have to stop a loosely laid out villainous plot to steal androids or sway the populace.
Sacred Coil has no cure for the Fade. They're using a public health crisis to increase their recruitment. Put an end to their lies. Show City 31 what they really are. Killers, fearmongers, and opportunists.
Yeah, the narrative in this game is a pretty nothing sandwich, mostly designed to give you a reason to shoot things. Many of Chimera Squad's innovations are inspired by this narrative, however. You're playing police, not soldiers, and so the procedure of how you fight is a little bit different. The baseline tactics of taking cover and missing a 96% shot are still exactly as you remember them, but Chimera Squad has more of an emphasis on its individual team members. Each member is basically their own preformed class that comes out of the box with way more tactical options than a basic rookie soldier, and each individual character gets their own turn. It's a shift from previous XCOMs, but it also brings Chimera Squad right in line with almost every turn-based RPG ever, and your priorities aren't that different. The main path to success is still to minimize how many enemies can shoot at you on a given turn, except now at any moment, whoever's going next is the immediate focus of your ire. The members of Chimera Squad also take each room one by one, wiping out all resistance before the game jumps you to the next room. This has a few different effects. For one, you have to maintain your resources throughout an entire level. There's a real tension to using equipment right at the start when you know you're still going to have 2 more fights to tackle after this one, as well as worries about your team's health as it persists across multiple firefights. And Chimera Squad seems more than aware of this tension, also giving you abilities that you can specifically use at the start of each room to string out across multiple encounters. The trade-off is that with each room cordoned off like its own self-contained level, there are fewer pieces to move around. You're never going to suddenly get flanked by a second squad showing up to ruin your plans or end up accidentally waking up an entire map, which flattens the range of tactical situations you can end up in and prevents the game from ever mustering some of those truly epic emergent stories from the battlefield that XCOM is so known for. But Chimera Squad came up with a pretty elegant solution to this issue in the form of the breach phase. Every room starts with you kicking in the door like a proper squad of riot cops and catching whichever goons you're fighting by surprise, whereupon everybody in the squad gets to pop off a quick shot as they run in, usually scoring a quick kill or 2 before they snap to some cover and combat starts in earnest. On its surface, the breach phase is an opportunity to start a fight on your terms. You get to pick 1 or 2 targets you don't want to deal with and just prematurely remove them from the fight. But it's also an opportunity for the game to set up interesting tactical scenarios as your team busts in from multiple entrances and scrambles into their starting cover of their own accord. At its most interesting, I ran into situations like the first VIP mission I jumped into, which saw me get into trouble multiple times. First when one of my characters infiltrated in solo to the opposite side of the map from our squad, and then a second time when a suicide-bombing android decided to stand directly on top of my VIP before I could get to him. The breach mechanic, as well as a lot of other introductions to Chimera Squad, absolutely works. However, there's unfortunately one significant part of Chimera Squad where all these interesting, promising new mechanics go to die: side missions. In between the big fights that push the story forward, you'll be playing through several lower stakes missions as you deal with various unrelated crises throughout the city. This is nothing new for XCOM, but the problem is that those lower stakes are also translated into increased simplicity. And in executing these side missions, Chimera Squad defangs much of what makes the rest of the game shine. Most side missions are a single encounter, so that whole resource conservation side of the gameplay isn't even present. In fact, many breach abilities such as terminals between battle heals are pointless in these situations. And perhaps most tellingly, the breach mechanic is the most underutilized of all. Breaching works to great effect when it has you splitting up your squad, having them attack from different directions, and throwing them into chaotic, tangled up scenarios. But many side missions only have one entrance, or, in one amusing case, 4 separate skylights that were all right next to each other. And this leads to incredibly rote and repetitive setups, where you break in, shoot a guy or two, then end up controlling one half of a room with 4 or 5 enemies on the other half and some objective telling you to push into them. And after a quick 2 to 3 turn skirmish, it's on to the next mission in another box with an almost identical pack of 5 guys in it. The result is the worst kind of fate for semi-randomized content. It feels like padding. Many of the game's most interesting ideas almost never get to shine here, and without them, Chimera Squad's inherent trade-offs that I've already discussed show through all the more clearly. The strategic space is flattened even further, and as the game progressed and took more time between main missions, thus making me go through more back-to-back side levels, those last few hours quickly became a hazy blur of nearly identical fights that weren't made any more interesting because this one was in a bar this time.
Get over here!
And by the time I hit the 5-hour mark, I was already starting to feel the grind and was content to move on. Which brings us to the big question. What do you get out of 5 hours with XCOM Chimera Squad? Most reports put this game at around the 20-hour mark, and having reached the final battle with one of the game's 3 gangs, that's probably not too far off, assuming there's some extra narrative stuff at the end after I've polished off all 3. But unless jumping over to a new gang results in a radical gameplay shakeup, I have to say that 5 hours has been mostly enough for me. I'm not saying that I didn't enjoy Chimera Squad, because I absolutely did, but I do feel like I've had my fill and I'm not overly eager to dive back in. In general, Chimera Squad is a formalization of previous games that more rigidly defines the edges of the series' gameplay, and in the process, XCOM loses much of its range. Most vitally, however, Chimera Squad replaces what it shaves away with new, brilliant ideas of its own that I absolutely love. It's just a shame that the game spends half its introductory hours barely engaging with those ideas. Chimera Squad can be an incredibly entertaining game when it wants to be, and it decides to do so often enough that it's probably still worth checking out. But I can't help but feel like it's merely a good game that could have been incredible if it just pushed itself a little further. Hey, if you guys didn't already know, I just launched a Patreon, and with your generous support, I can start doing all kinds of cool stuff, like more in-depth video essays and 5-hour streams where I review games like this in real time. So if any of that sounds cool, please consider becoming a patron today. But I hope you enjoyed this first 5 review. Thanks for watching this far, and I'll see you all next week.